lives of extraordinary women who shaped the medieval world. Queens who wielded power with cunning and grace, warriors who defied expectations on the battlefield, and saints who inspired devotion through their faith and visions. These women, though often overlooked, left an indelible mark on history. So sit back, relax, and let's uncover the stories of these remarkable figures who thrived in a time of challenge and transformation. Women in medieval society. Setting the stage, the Middle Ages, spanning nearly a millennium, was a period of profound contrasts. For women, it was an era of challenges and opportunities, shaped by their class, faith, and the rigid expectations of a patriarchal society. While the stories of queens, warriors, and saints stand out, the majority of women lived lives defined by hard work, faith, and survival. Yet their contributions were essential to the social, economic, and cultural fabric of medieval life. Medieval society was structured around the feudal system, which divided people into three estates: clergy, nobility, and commoners. Women participated in each of these groups, though their roles were often dictated by the men around them. Noble women, for example, managed estates, brokered alliances through marriage, and influenced politics as queens or regents. Their lives were closely tied to their families' fortunes, and their marriages were often strategic tools for securing power and peace. Peasant women, by contrast, lived under harsher conditions. They worked alongside men in the fields, tended livestock, and maintained households. Their labor was vital to the survival of their families and communities, but it was rarely acknowledged in historical records. In towns and cities, women contributed to trade and crafts, working as bakers, merchants, and weavers. Many ran businesses in their husband's absence, and widows often gained a degree of autonomy, taking over family enterprises or participating in guild activities. The church played a central role in shaping women's lives, defining both their spiritual and societal roles. Religious teachings presented women as either virtuous and obedient, like the Virgin Mary, or as dangerous and sinful, like Eve. This duality reinforced strict moral codes, which emphasized chastity, piety, and obedience. Yet the church also offered opportunities for women, particularly those who entered religious life. Convents and monasteries provided spaces where women could receive education, develop skills, and attain positions of leadership. Abbesses, in particular, wielded considerable influence, overseeing lands and managing their communities. Education for women was limited, but not entirely absent. Noble women were often taught to read and write, enabling them to manage estates and correspondence. Religious institutions provided more structured learning, producing intellectual figures like Hildegard of Bingen, who combined her roles as an abbess, theologian, and scientist to leave a lasting legacy. Christina de Pizan, one of the first professional female writers in Europe, directly challenged the gender norms of her time, advocating for the intellectual and moral equality of women through her works. Despite these opportunities, medieval women faced significant challenges. Maternal mortality was high, with childbirth presenting a constant danger. Diseases, famine, and war disproportionately affected women, who often bore the responsibility of rebuilding homes and communities. Legally, women's rights were tied to their relationships with men, whether as daughters, wives, or widows. In some regions, however, laws allowed women to inherit land or property, granting them a degree of independence. Certain women transcended these limitations to leave an indelible mark on history. Queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine and Matilda of England played pivotal roles in medieval politics, demonstrating that leadership was not exclusively a male domain. Eleanor, in particular, was a remarkable figure, serving as queen consort to both France and England and influencing European culture and politics through her patronage of the arts and her strategic alliances. By the later Middle Ages, societal changes began to alter women's roles. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, led to labor shortages, creating new opportunities for women in trades and industries. The decline of feudalism and the rise of urban centers also allowed women to pursue roles in commerce and education, though these gains were often temporary and met with resistance. Ultimately, medieval women navigated a world that sought to confine them, finding ways to adapt, thrive, and influence the societies they lived in. From the resilience of peasant women to the political maneuvering of queens and the spiritual contributions of nuns, their stories offer a window into the complexities of life during the Middle Ages. As we continue, we'll delve into the lives of two extraordinary queens, Eleanor of Aquitaine and Matilda of England, who challenged the expectations of their time and shaped the course of European history. Queens of power, Eleanor of Aquitaine and Matilda of England. The Middle Ages were not kind to women who sought power, yet a few extraordinary queens managed to defy societal expectations and shape the course of history. Among them, Eleanor of Aquitaine and Matilda of England stand out as figures of immense influence, navigating the male-dominated world of medieval politics with intelligence, resilience, and ambition. Eleanor of Aquitaine, 1122-1204, was one of the most powerful and fascinating women of her era. Born into immense wealth and privilege as the Duchess of Aquitaine, she inherited one of the largest and richest territories in Europe at the age of 15. Her marriage to Louis VII of France made her queen consort, but her independent spirit and political acumen often clashed with the reserved and pious Louis. Eleanor's active role in the Second Crusade alongside Louis only intensified tensions, as her leadership and influence were seen as unconventional and to some even threatening. Their marriage was annulled in 1152, a rare move that allowed Eleanor to reclaim her lands. Shortly after, she married Henry Plantagenet, who would become King Henry II of England. This union brought Aquitaine under English control and made Eleanor queen consort once more. As queen, Eleanor was far from a passive figure. She managed lands, acted as a diplomat, and played a critical role in raising her sons, two of whom, Richard the Lionheart and John, would later become kings. Her support for her sons during their rebellion against Henry II led to her imprisonment for over a decade, but even in captivity, Eleanor remained a force to be reckoned with. Eleanor's influence extended beyond politics. She was a patron of the arts, fostering the culture of courtly love that flourished in Aquitaine. Her courts became centers of poetry, music, and intellectual exchange, leaving a cultural legacy that resonated long after her death at the age of 82. Matilda of England, 1102–1167, known as Empress Matilda, was another formidable queen who challenged the norms of her time. The daughter of King Henry, patriarchal of England, Matilda was married to Holy Roman Emperor Henry V at a young age, earning her the title of Empress. After the emperor's death, she returned to England, where her father named her his heir, a decision that would lead to one of the most tumultuous periods in English history. When Henry I died in 1135, Matilda's cousin, Stephen of Blois, seized the throne, sparking a civil war known as the Anarchy. Matilda refused to accept this usurpation and waged a prolonged struggle to reclaim her rightful crown. Her campaign was marked by both triumphs and setbacks, including her dramatic escape from Oxford Castle in the dead of winter, cloaked in white to blend with the snow. Although Matilda never officially became queen, her efforts paved the way for her son, Henry II, to ascend the throne and establish the powerful Plantagenet dynasty. Matilda's resilience and determination left a lasting legacy, challenging the idea that women could not wield power effectively in medieval politics. Both Eleanor and Matilda faced intense scrutiny and opposition for their ambition and authority. They lived in a world where women were expected to be submissive and deferential, yet they defied these expectations, asserting their agency in matters of state. Their lives were marked by personal sacrifices and public achievements, showing that power was not solely the domain of men, even in an age that sought to confine women to the shadows. As we delve further into the stories of medieval women, we'll see how their influence extended beyond the throne. From the battlefield to the cloister, women shaped their world in ways both visible and hidden, challenging the limits imposed upon them. The warrior spirit. Joan of Arc and other female fighters. While medieval warfare was overwhelmingly dominated by men, there were moments when women defied societal norms to take up arms. Among these extraordinary figures, Joan of Arc stands as a beacon of courage and faith, her life and legacy inspiring countless generations. Yet, she was not alone. History reveals other women who fought for their beliefs, their lands, and their people, challenging the boundaries of what was deemed acceptable for women in a patriarchal age. Joan of Arc, 1412–1431, known as the Maid of Orleans, is perhaps the most famous female warrior of the medieval period. Born to a peasant family in Domremy, France, Joan claimed to receive divine visions instructing her to support Charles VII in reclaiming his throne and to drive the English out of France during the 100 Years' War. At just 17 years old, she convinced the Dauphin to grant her an army. Her military leadership, combined with her unwavering faith, led to the miraculous lifting of the Siege of Orleans in 1429, a pivotal turning point in the war. Joan's rise to prominence was as shocking as it was swift. Dressed in men's armor and carrying her banner, she inspired troops with her determination and confidence, earning their respect despite the era's strict gender norms. However, her success also drew suspicion and jealousy. Captured by Burgundian forces in 1430, she was handed over to the English, who tried her for heresy and witchcraft. In 1431, she was burned at the stake at the age of 19. Her trial and execution highlighted the fear she invoked in both political and religious authorities, who saw her defiance of traditional roles as a threat to the established order. Despite her tragic end, Joan's story did not conclude with her death. She was exonerated in a posthumous trial in 1456, and in 1920, she was canonized as a saint. Joan remains a symbol of courage, faith, and the power of conviction in the face of adversity. Joan of Arc's story is extraordinary, but she was not the only woman to wield weapons during the Middle Ages. Noble women defending castles during sieges were a common sight. These women were often left in charge when their husbands were away at war or court, assuming roles as military leaders out of necessity. For example, Matilda of Tuscany, 1046-1115, an Italian noblewoman, was a formidable military commander who supported the papacy during the investiture controversy. Known as La Grande Contessa, she led armies into battle and played a significant role in securing the position of Pope Gregory VII against the Holy Roman Emperor. In Spain, the Reconquista saw several women taking active roles in the fight against Muslim forces. Doña Urraca of Zamora and Isabella of Castile are notable examples. Isabella, in particular, not only ruled as queen, but also oversaw military campaigns, including the conquest of Granada in 1492, which marked the end of Muslim rule in Iberia. Her presence on the battlefield and strategic leadership solidified her reputation as a warrior queen. Peasant women also participated in resistance efforts, particularly during periods of occupation or rebellion. These women often fought out of desperation, defending their homes and families from invaders or oppressive lords. Though their names are largely lost to history, their contributions were crucial in moments of crisis. These women shared a common thread: the courage to step into roles that defied societal norms, often risking their lives and reputations. Their actions were not always celebrated in their time, and many were vilified or erased from the historical record. Yet their stories endure as testaments to the resilience and agency of women, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As we move forward, we'll shift our focus from the battlefield to the spiritual realm, exploring the lives of saints and mystics who influenced the religious and cultural landscapes of the medieval world. Saints and mystics. Catherine of Siena and Hildegard of Bingen. The deeply spiritual world of the Middle Ages. Saints and mystics held a unique place in society, transcending traditional roles for women. These extraordinary figures were often seen as bridges between the divine and the earthly, their visions and writings influencing both the church and secular rulers. Among the most remarkable of these women were Catherine of Siena and Hildegard of Bingen, whose lives and works left an indelible mark on medieval thought, faith, and culture. Catherine of Siena, 1347 to 1380, was born during a tumultuous period in European history marked by the Black Death and political instability within the Church. From a young age, Catherine displayed an intense devotion to God, choosing a life of chastity and asceticism despite her family's efforts to arrange her marriage. She became a member of the Dominican Third Order, allowing her to live a religious life without entering a convent. Catherine's mystical experiences, including visions of Christ and the Virgin Mary, garnered her a reputation as a holy woman. Her most famous experience, the mystical marriage to Christ, symbolized her complete dedication to the divine. Yet Catherine's influence extended far beyond her personal spirituality. She actively engaged with the political and religious issues of her time, corresponding with popes, cardinals, and rulers. Her letters, written with passionate conviction, urged the Pope to return the papacy from Avignon to Rome, a critical step in resolving the Western Schism. Catherine's theological writings, including her masterpiece, The Dialogue of Divine Providence, explored themes of sin, virtue, and divine love, offering profound insights into the human relationship with God. In 1461, she was canonized, and in 1970, she was named a Doctor of the Church, one of the few women to receive this honor. Hildegard of Bingen, 1098-1179, a German Benedictine abbess, was another extraordinary mystic who transcended the boundaries of her time. Entering a monastery at a young age, Hildegard began experiencing visions she described as a divine light that illuminated her understanding of Scripture and the natural world. At first hesitant to share her experiences, she eventually gained approval from church authorities to write about her visions, which she compiled in works like Scivias, Know the Ways. Hildegard's influence extended beyond theology. She was a polymath, contributing to fields as diverse as medicine, music, and natural sciences. Her compositions, including hymns and chants, are celebrated for their ethereal beauty and complexity, blending spiritual devotion with artistic brilliance. Hildegard also wrote texts on herbal medicine and the healing properties of plants, demonstrating a keen observational understanding of the natural world. As an abbess, Hildegard founded 2 monasteries where she fostered a vibrant intellectual and spiritual community. Her correspondence with popes, emperors, and other prominent figures reflected her boldness and confidence in addressing issues of both faith and governance. She was canonized in 2012 and named a Doctor of the Church, cementing her status as one of the most influential women in medieval Christianity. Both Catherine and Hildegard used their spiritual authority to challenge societal norms. In an age when women were often excluded from formal theological discourse, they carved out spaces where their voices could be heard. Their writings and actions not only deepened the Church's understanding of faith, but also highlighted the potential for women to influence both spiritual and temporal matters. The lives of saints and mystics like Catherine and Hildegard reveal a unique form of power available to women in the Middle Ages. By claiming divine inspiration, they could bypass traditional restrictions and assert their authority in ways that were otherwise unattainable. Their legacies endure as examples of how faith and intellect could empower women to transcend the limitations of their time. Next, we'll turn our attention to the lives of everyday women, wives, mothers, and peasants, whose labor and resilience formed the backbone of medieval society. Women in the shadows, wives, mothers, and peasants. While queens, saints, and mystics shaped history in visible ways, the vast majority of women in the Middle Ages lived quieter lives, working tirelessly to sustain their families and communities. These women, wives, mothers, and peasants formed the backbone of medieval society, their contributions often overlooked but essential to the survival of their world. For peasant women, life revolved around the rhythms of agricultural labor. They worked alongside men in the fields, planting, harvesting, and tending to livestock. In addition to farming, they managed households, cooked, cleaned, and cared for children. In some cases, they also produced goods such as textiles or dairy, products to sell or barter. Their days were long and grueling, dictated by the seasons and the demands of feudal lords. Marriage was a central aspect of life for most women. In rural communities, marriages were often arranged within a local network of families designed to consolidate resources or strengthen ties. Women brought dowries into their marriages, which could include money, livestock, or land. Once married, they were expected to manage domestic affairs and ensure the survival of their households, balancing their duties as wives, mothers, and laborers. Childbirth was both a vital and perilous aspect of medieval womanhood. Maternal mortality rates were high due to complications during delivery and the lack of medical knowledge. Midwives played a crucial role in childbirth, often relying on traditional remedies and practices to assist women through the process. Despite the risks, having children was seen as a woman's primary duty, ensuring the continuation of family lines and providing labor for farms or businesses. Widowhood, though fraught with challenges, sometimes offered women unexpected opportunities. For independence, widows could inherit land or businesses, allowing them to manage estates, run workshops, or even participate in local trade. In towns and cities, they often took over their late husbands' roles in guilds, gaining recognition for their skills and leadership. Some widows became prominent figures in their communities, using their status to secure financial stability for their families. In urban areas, women contributed to the growing economies of medieval towns. They worked as bakers, brewers, weavers, and merchants, often running small businesses or assisting their husbands in trade. Marketplaces buzzed with the activity of women selling goods, from fresh produce to handcrafted textiles. Although guilds were typically dominated by men, some allowed women to join, especially if they were widows or daughters of guild members. Education for peasant and working-class women was minimal, but they passed on essential knowledge through practical experience. Skills such as weaving, cooking, and healing were taught informally within families, ensuring that women could contribute to their households and communities. Herbal medicine, in particular, became a domain where women excelled, blending practical knowledge with traditions passed down through generations. Despite their critical roles, peasant women had little political power and were largely excluded from formal decision-making processes. Feudal obligations tied them to the land and and subjected them to the authority of lords who controlled their labor and often dictated the terms of their lives. Taxes, tithes, and other burdens weighed heavily on peasant families, leaving little room for social mobility. However, women's resilience in the face of these challenges was remarkable. They found ways to adapt, whether through small acts of defiance or by leveraging their skills to improve their circumstances. In times of crisis, such as famine or war, their labor and ingenuity often made the difference between survival and collapse. The lives of medieval wives, mothers, and peasants remind us that history is not only shaped by kings and queens, but also by the countless unnamed individuals who kept the wheels of society turning. Their stories, though rarely recorded in chronicles or official records, offer a window into the everyday realities of medieval life and the strength required to endure its hardships. As we continue, we'll shift focus to the women of the church, nuns, abbesses, and reformers, whose spiritual dedication often translated into significant social and political influence. Women in the shadows, wives, mothers, and peasants. While queens, saints, and mystics shaped history in visible ways, the vast majority of women in the Middle Ages lived quieter lives, working tirelessly to sustain their families and communities. These women, wives, mothers, and peasants formed the backbone of medieval society, their contributions often overlooked, but essential to the survival of their world. For peasant women, life revolved around the rhythms of agricultural labor. They worked alongside men in the fields, planting, harvesting, and tending to livestock. In addition to farming, they managed households, cooked, cleaned, and cared for children. In some cases, they also produced goods such as textiles or dairy, products to sell or barter. Their days were long and grueling, dictated by the seasons and the demands of feudal lords. Marriage was a central aspect of life for most women. In rural communities, marriages were often arranged within a local network of families designed to consolidate resources or strengthen ties. Women brought dowries into their marriages, which could include money, livestock, or land. Once married, they were expected to manage domestic affairs and ensure the survival of their households, balancing their duties as wives, mothers, and laborers. Childbirth was both a vital and perilous aspect of medieval womanhood. Maternal mortality rates were high due to complications during delivery and the lack of medical knowledge. Midwives played a crucial role in childbirth, often relying on traditional remedies and practices to assist women through the process. Despite the risks, having children was seen as a woman's primary duty, ensuring the continuation of family lines and providing labor for farms or businesses. Widowhood, though fraught with challenges, sometimes offered women unexpected opportunities for independence. Widows could inherit land or businesses, allowing them to manage estates, run workshops, or even participate in local trade. In towns and cities, they often took over their late husband's roles in guilds, gaining recognition for their skills and leadership. Some widows became prominent figures in their communities, using their status to secure financial stability for their families. In urban areas, women contributed to the growing economies of medieval towns. They worked as bakers, brewers, weavers, and merchants, often running small businesses or assisting their husbands in trade. Marketplaces buzzed with the activity of women selling goods, from fresh produce to handcrafted textiles. Although guilds were typically dominated by men, some allowed women to join, especially if they were widows or daughters of guild members. Education for peasant and working class women was minimal, but they passed on essential knowledge through practical experience. Skills such as weaving, cooking, and healing were taught informally within families, ensuring that women could contribute to their households and communities. Herbal medicine, in particular, became a domain where women excelled, blending practical knowledge with traditions passed down through generations. Despite their critical roles, peasant women had little political power and were largely excluded from formal decision-making processes. Feudal obligations tied them to the land and subjected them to the authority of lords, who controlled their labor and often dictated the terms of their lives. Taxes, tithes, and other burdens weighed heavily on peasant families, leaving little room for social mobility. However, women's resilience in the face of these challenges was remarkable. They found ways to adapt, whether through small acts of defiance or by leveraging their skills to improve their circumstances. In times of crisis, such as famine or war, their labor and ingenuity often made the difference between survival and collapse. The lives of medieval wives, mothers, and peasants remind us that history is not only shaped by kings and queens, but also by the countless unnamed individuals who kept the wheels of society turning. Their stories, though rarely recorded in chronicles or official records, offer a window into the everyday realities of medieval life and the strength required to endure its hardships. As we continue, we'll shift focus to the women of the church, nuns, abbesses, and reformers, whose spiritual dedication often translated into significant social and political influence. The women of the church, nuns, abbesses, and reformers. For women in the Middle Ages, the church offered one of the few avenues to escape the constraints of marriage and domestic life. Joining a convent could provide not only spiritual fulfillment, but also opportunities for education, leadership, and influence. Nuns, abbesses, and reformers played vital roles in the religious, intellectual, and cultural life of the medieval world, leaving behind a legacy that shaped the church and society. Entering a convent was a significant decision, often influenced by a combination of personal choice and family circumstances. For noble families, placing daughters in convents could be a strategic move, ensuring the family's spiritual standing and reducing the number of heirs competing for inheritance. For some women, particularly widows or those seeking refuge from political or social turmoil, religious life offered safety and stability. Within convents, nuns lived according to strict rules, typically those outlined by orders such as the Benedictines, Cistercians, or Dominicans. Their daily lives revolved around prayer, study, and work, which could include copying manuscripts, creating illuminated texts, or managing agricultural estates owned by the convent. These tasks required discipline and skill, and many convents became centers of learning and artistic production. Abbesses who led these communities often wielded significant authority. They managed the convent's finances, lands, and relationships with local nobility, sometimes rivaling the power of male clergy. One notable abbess was Hilda of Whitby, 614-680, who presided over a double monastery for both men and women in Northumbria. Under her leadership, Whitby became a hub of learning and culture, and she played a pivotal role in resolving theological disputes at the Synod of Whitby in 664. The intellectual contributions of women in the church were profound. Hildegard of Bingen, mentioned earlier, is a prime example. Her visionary works, combined with her studies in music, medicine, and theology, exemplify how convents provided spaces for women to engage in scholarly pursuits. Another influential figure was Julian of Norwich, 1343-1416, an English anchoress whose spiritual writings, particularly revelations of divine love, are celebrated for their theological depth and universal appeal. The later Middle Ages also saw the rise of reformers who sought to address corruption within the church and inspire greater spiritual devotion. Catherine of Siena, whose efforts were instrumental in bringing the papacy back to Rome, was one such figure. Although not a nun, her role as a tertiary of the Dominican order allowed her to navigate both religious and political spheres, challenging the church's leadership while maintaining her devotion. Nuns were also active in providing social services. Many convents functioned as hospitals, offering care for the sick and shelter for the poor. Women in these institutions acted as healers, using their knowledge of herbs and remedies to treat illnesses. These acts of charity reinforced the Church's role as a cornerstone of medieval society and highlighted the practical contributions of religious women. However, the Church's support for women's religious roles was not without limitations. As male-dominated institutions like the papacy and higher clergy consolidated power, they often sought to restrict the autonomy of female religious communities. The 13th century saw increasing efforts to enforce stricter enclosure rules, confining nuns to their convents and limiting their interactions with the outside world. These restrictions, while framed as a way to protect spiritual purity, also curtailed the broader influence women could wield. Despite these challenges, women in the ASMEO Church found ways to assert their agency. Their writings, leadership, and acts of service left an enduring impact on medieval Christianity. They shaped theology, preserved knowledge, and provided critical support to their communities, all while navigating the constraints of a patriarchal system. The legacy of these women reminds us that faith and intellect could serve as powerful tools for change, even in a world that sought to limit women's roles. As we turn our focus to the literary contributions of medieval women, we'll explore how they used words to challenge norms and leave their mark on history. The world of literature, female writers and patrons. In the Middle Ages, the written word was a powerful tool, and while literacy was largely reserved for men, some women managed to carve out spaces for themselves as writers, poets, and patrons of the arts. These women not only challenged the gender norms of their time, but it also contributed to the preservation and evolution of medieval culture and thought. Among the most remarkable literary figures of the era was Christine de Pizan, 1364 c. 1430, often considered Europe's first professional female writer. Born in Venice and raised at the French court, Christine became a widow at a young age. Left to support her family, she turned to writing, producing works that range from courtly poetry to political treatises. Her most famous work, the Book of the City of Ladies, is a bold defense of women, challenging misogynistic ideas and highlighting the achievements of historical and mythological women. Christine's writings offered a rare female perspective on contemporary society, advocating for the intellectual and moral equality of women. In religious literature, women like Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich made profound contributions. Hildegard's visionary texts, often accompanied by her compositions, offered theological insights and celebrated the connection between the divine and the natural world. Julian, meanwhile, wrote Revelations of Divine Love, the first known book, in English, authored by a woman. Her reflections on God's love and forgiveness provided a compassionate counterpoint to the more punitive religious doctrines of her time. Female writers often faced criticism and skepticism, as the act of writing was considered a masculine pursuit. To gain acceptance, many framed their works as divinely inspired or sought patronage from influential figures. Religious women, in particular, leveraged their spiritual authority to legitimize their writings. This strategy allowed them to navigate societal restrictions while sharing their ideas with a broader audience. Beyond individual authors, many women played crucial roles as patrons of literature and the arts. Queens, duchesses, and noblewomen often sponsored poets, chroniclers, and artists, ensuring the production and preservation of works that might otherwise have been lost to history. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for example, was a key patron of troubadours, fostering the tradition of courtly love that influenced medieval European literature. Similarly, Margaret of York, a 15th century duchess, supported the creation of richly illustrated manuscripts, blending artistic beauty with literary excellence. The rise of vernacular languages during the later Middle Ages also opened new doors for female participation in literature. While Latin remained the language of the church and scholarship, vernacular texts allowed women with limited formal education to engage with literature more directly. This shift enabled a broader range of women to contribute as readers, writers, and even storytellers, passing down oral traditions that enriched the cultural tapestry of their communities. Women's contributions to literature extended beyond writing and patronage. In convents, nuns were often responsible for copying manuscripts, preserving religious and philosophical texts for future generations. This painstaking work required both literacy and artistic skill, as many manuscripts were adorned with intricate illuminations. The role of women in this labor ensured that the intellectual heritage of the Middle Ages was not only safeguarded, but also enriched by their efforts. Despite these achievements, female writers and patrons often worked in the shadows, their names forgotten or overshadowed by their male counterparts. Yet their influence can be felt in the preservation of medieval literature, the promotion of artistic innovation, and the gradual expansion of intellectual opportunities for women. Their stories remind us of the resilience and creativity required to challenge societal norms and leave a lasting mark on history. As we move forward, we'll explore the economic roles of women, merchants, artisans, and healers who contributed to the medieval economy in ways that were both visible and invisible. The economic role: merchants, artisans, and healers. In the Middle Ages, the economy depended heavily on the labor and ingenuity of women, even if their contributions often went unacknowledged. From bustling marketplaces to quiet workshops and healing gardens, women were deeply involved in sustaining local economies and providing essential goods and services. Whether as merchants, artisans, or healers, their work formed the backbone of daily life in medieval society. In towns and cities, women played active roles in trade and commerce. As merchants, they bought and sold goods ranging from textiles to spices, often working alongside their husbands or independently as widows. In many cases, they managed shops or market stalls, ensuring that trade flowed smoothly within their communities. Widows, in particular, had unique opportunities to maintain or expand family businesses, as they could inherit their late husband's assets and guild memberships. Guilds, which regulated trades and crafts in medieval towns, were predominantly male-dominated. However, women participated in certain trades, especially in textile production, baking, brewing, and midwifery. In some cities, female artisans were recognized as guild members, particularly in family-run workshops where daughters and wives worked alongside male relatives. Women weavers, for example, played a vital role in producing the high-quality fabrics that were in demand across Europe. Brewing was another industry where women thrived. Known as brewsters in England, women were often responsible for brewing, ale, a staple of the medieval diet. This work combined domestic skills with entrepreneurial spirit, as women sold their products in local markets or taverns. Brewing was particularly significant in the early medieval period, before large-scale commercial breweries dominated the industry. The role of women as healers was equally important, drawing on traditional knowledge passed down through generations. Women served as midwives, herbalists, and caregivers. They treated illnesses, delivered babies, and provided remedies for a variety of ailments. This work required not only skill, but also an intimate understanding of plants and their medicinal properties. Many women healers were deeply respected within their communities, though they often worked without formal recognition. In rural areas, peasant women combined agricultural labor with household responsibilities. They tended fields, cared for livestock, and processed food, ensuring the survival of their families and villages. Their work was physically demanding and often overlooked, yet it was crucial to the functioning of feudal economies. Women also contributed to seasonal labor during harvests, working alongside men to gather crops and store them for the winter. Despite their significant economic roles, women faced challenges and restrictions. In many regions, laws limited their ability to own property or control their earnings. Marriage often transferred a woman's legal and financial rights to her husband, reinforcing the patriarchal structure of medieval society. However, widows and unmarried women enjoyed greater autonomy, using their positions to negotiate business deals, manage estates, or lead workshops. Religious and societal attitudes toward women's work were complex. While the church praised industriousness and charity, it also discouraged women from gaining too much economic independence, fearing it might disrupt the traditional family structure. This tension is evident in the occasional moral scrutiny directed at women merchants or healers, who were sometimes accused of greed or practicing witchcraft. Despite these obstacles, women demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resourcefulness. They navigated the constraints of their time to find ways to thrive, supporting their families and contributing to the broader economy. Their labor, whether in bustling city markets or quiet rural workshops, was indispensable, even if it was often undervalued by contemporary chroniclers. As we continue, we'll examine the legal and societal frameworks that shaped women's rights and independence during the Middle Ages, exploring the ways in which they navigated these systems to assert their agency. Women and the law, rights, limitations, and independence. In the Middle Ages, the legal and societal frameworks governing women's rights were deeply rooted in patriarchy. A woman's identity was often tied to her relationships, daughter, wife, or widow, and her rights were defined accordingly. Yet, within these constraints, medieval women found ways to assert independence, navigate legal systems, and protect their interests, even in a society that largely sought to limit their autonomy. Medieval laws varied across regions, reflecting the complexities of feudal systems and local customs. Canon law, the legal system of the church, was a dominant force in religious and moral matters, while secular law governed property rights, trade, and inheritance. Both systems placed women in a subordinate position to men, yet they also provided certain avenues for women to exercise agency. One of the most significant legal milestones for women was their ability to own and inherit property. In many regions, women could inherit land or wealth, particularly as widows or in the absence of male heirs. This was especially true in areas like England, where the system of primogeniture allowed daughters to inherit if no sons were present. Women who inherited land often gained substantial influence, managing estates, collecting rents, and even overseeing laborers. However, these rights were frequently contested, especially by male relatives seeking to claim control. Marriage was a cornerstone of medieval law, and a woman's legal status often shifted dramatically upon entering it. Married women were generally subject to coverture, a legal doctrine that placed their property and legal identity under their husband's control. This meant that a wife's earnings, possessions, and even her decisions were effectively governed by her spouse. However, some legal traditions, such as dower rights, ensured that widows received a portion of their husband's estate upon his death, providing financial security and a degree of independence. Unmarried women, including widows, enjoyed greater legal freedom compared to their married counterparts. They could enter contracts, sue or be sued in court, and manage their own property. Many widows used this autonomy to run businesses, oversee agricultural estates, or participate in local markets. For some, widowhood represented an opportunity to gain a level of self-determination that was otherwise unattainable during marriage. towns and cities, laws governing guilds and trade often allowed women to participate in the economy, particularly as artisans and merchants. Women could inherit their husband's membership in a guild, enabling them to continue the family trade. This was especially common in industries like textiles, brewing, and midwifery. While their contributions were significant, women were typically excluded from leadership roles within guilds, reflecting the broader gender hierarchy of medieval society. The Church's influence on medieval law was profound, shaping moral and ethical norms that often restricted women's behavior. Adultery, fornication, and other offenses deemed immoral were harshly punished, with women often facing greater scrutiny and harsher penalties than men. The Church also sought to control women's reproductive rights, emphasizing their role as mothers and discouraging practices like contraception. Despite these restrictions, women played key roles in ecclesiastical courts, particularly as witnesses and plaintiffs in cases of moral disputes. Legal systems also reflected societal fears of women's independence, particularly in cases involving accusations of witchcraft. Women who defied traditional roles, such as healers, midwives, or outspoken widows, were sometimes targeted as witches, especially in the late medieval period. These accusations were often rooted in local disputes, jealousy, or suspicion of women who wielded knowledge or influence outside male control. Despite these challenges, women were not passive victims of the legal system. They frequently turned to courts to protect their rights, contest unfair treatment, or seek justice. Legal records reveal women suing for their dowries, defending their inheritances, and challenging accusations of wrongdoing. These cases highlight the ways in which women engaged with the legal structures of their time, using them to assert agency and secure their positions in society. By the late Middle Ages, shifts in economic and social structures began to alter women's legal standing. The rise of urban centers and the decline of feudalism created new opportunities for women in trade and commerce. However, these gains were often met with resistance, as both church and state sought to reassert control over women's roles. The legal status of medieval women offers a complex picture of both limitation and resilience. Legacy and misconceptions. The lasting impact of medieval women. The women of the Middle Ages have often been overshadowed in historical narratives, their contributions reduced to stereotypes or confined to the margins of recorded history. Yet their roles as queens, warriors, saints, artisans, and caretakers reveal a rich tapestry of influence and resilience. As we reflect on their legacy, it becomes clear that the stories of medieval women are not only integral to understanding the past, but also offer enduring lessons about power, agency, and perseverance. One of the most enduring misconceptions about medieval women is the notion that they were universally powerless and subordinate. While it is true that societal structures and legal systems were overwhelmingly patriarchal, women found ways to assert influence, both overtly and subtly. Figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine, Joan of Arc, and Hildegard of Bingen demonstrate how women could rise to prominence, defying societal norms to leave an indelible mark on politics, religion, and culture. For many women, power was exercised not through public authority, but through the essential roles they played in their communities and families. Peasant women were the backbone of agricultural economies, ensuring the survival of villages through their labor. Urban women contributed to commerce and craft production, running businesses and participating in markets. Religious women provided spiritual and social services, preserving knowledge and offering care to the sick and poor. These contributions, though less visible in historical records, were vital to the functioning of medieval society. The cultural legacy of medieval women is also significant. As patrons of the arts, queens and noblewomen like Eleanor of Aquitaine fostered the development of courtly culture, poetry, and music. Religious women preserved and created literary works, ensuring that theological and philosophical ideas were passed on to future generations. Christine de Pizan's The Book of the City of Ladies remains a powerful defense of women's intellectual and moral equality, challenging the misogynistic ideas of her time and resonating with modern audiences. Despite their achievements, the historical memory of medieval women has often been shaped by myths and biases. The idealized images of virtuous saints or cunning seductresses reflect the limited ways in which women were portrayed in medieval and later sources. These archetypes, while compelling, obscure the complexity of real women's lives and the diversity of their experiences. The modern interpretation of medieval women has evolved significantly. Feminist historians and scholars have worked to uncover the hidden stories of women, analyzing legal records, personal letters, and religious texts to paint a fuller picture of their lives. This scholarship has revealed not only the challenges women faced, but also the ways in which they navigated and sometimes subverted the constraints of their time. The legacy of medieval women extends beyond their historical context. Their stories remind us of the resilience and ingenuity required to thrive in a world that often sought to limit their potential. They challenge us to reconsider the ways in which power and influence are exercised, showing that even within restrictive systems, agency can take many forms. Moreover, the lessons of medieval women have implications for how we view gender and power today. The struggles and triumphs of figures like Joan of Arc or Catherine of Siena highlight the ongoing tensions between societal expectations and individual ambition. Their lives inspire us to question the limitations placed on women in any era and to recognize the potential for greatness in those who defy convention. As we conclude this journey through the lives of medieval women, we are left with a deeper appreciation for their contributions and a renewed commitment to uncovering the stories of those who shaped history from the shadows. From queens who ruled with wisdom to peasant women who sustained their communities, their legacy is one of strength, creativity, and enduring impact.